Chapter 6. Lieutenant Daniel Pilkington, Senior Detective, Wizard, Second Class, walked down the hall to his office. He briefly checked his security sensor for disturbances and then entered. It was a small office with no windows and scarcely space for his desk and chair, but he was very proud of it. He had held his position and this particular office space for nearly 10 years now. If he were careful and very lucky, would continue to hold it for at least another 10. Daniel removed his wizard robes and hung them on a hook in the wall. He placed the box lunch his wife had prepared for him on the desk. Then Daniel squeezed behind his desk and sat down. As he did every morning, Daniel put his lunch in the bottom desk drawer and then checked his messages. 4 possible fugitive sightings and a claim for a broken wand. Added to his previous cases, that should keep him busy for the day. Daniel checked the date and timestamp of each message and rearranged them carefully in chronological order, oldest on top and the most recent last. Then he placed the stack beneath the other cases already on his desk. It was very important to follow up on every report and claim in the appropriate order. That way, no one could claim favoritism on his part, unless, of course, Daniel was ordered to do otherwise by a superior. Then that particular case would be followed to completion before he returned to his original caseload. Daniel was frequently handed a case and told to give it priority, so it was important to keep track of the others so they wouldn't get forgotten. Besides the messages, there was also the weekly report from the Muggle Security Office. Daniel thumbed through it briefly. It didn't look quite right somehow. He'd have to think about it before passing the report on. He set that report on the other side of his desk for future consideration. Wizard Flint wants to see Pilkington. Daniel looked up to see Cedric Diggory standing in the doorway. In his early 40s, Cedric could be considered quite handsome with his broad shoulders, smooth features, clear blue eyes, and light brown hair. Cedric looked quite dashing in that black uniform and the very picture of an experienced wizard. He once was, from all accounts. Daniel knew that Cedric had won the Triwizard competition at Hogwarts one year, a true testament to his abilities. He had been a fairly good Quidditch player as well. But all that was before. One day, Cedric was found wandering in the woods, barely functional with his mind nearly destroyed. The healers could do nothing for him. No one claimed credit for the crime, and the case was never solved. The attack on Cedric devastated his father, who immediately withdrew his name from consideration for Minister of Magic. That left the way clear for Lucius Malfoy instead. Rudolphus Lestrange later replaced Malfoy when the Dark Lord's power had solidified. Cedric's father, though broken politically, remained a member of the ministry. Rather than confine Cedric to St. Mungle's or in his house for the rest of his days, Amos Diggory decided to find something Cedric could do within his limited abilities. Accordingly, Cedric was bounced from department to department until he at last found a place in this office. Every morning, at precisely 7:55 a.m., the Diggory house elf brought Cedric, dressed in an appropriate security uniform and his wizard robes, to the station front desk. There, a receptionist pinned on Cedric's security badge and escorted him to his chair. At precisely 7:55 p.m., the house elf returned to collect Cedric. Capable of carrying out simple commands within boundaries, Cedric delivered things during the day. Simple verbal messages, written messages, packages, papers. He was very good at it, as long as the directions were clearly given. "Thank you," replied Daniel calmly. He thought briefly. Had he any errands for Cedric to do? No. "Wizard Diggory," he said firmly, "go to your chair and sit down." Without a word, Cedric turned and left. He would sit at his chair until the next person needed his services. Daniel spun his chair around until he was facing the bare wall behind him. Using his wand, he muttered a quick spell and caused the blank space to reform into a mirror. He used it to check that his appearance met with current regulations. His curly red-brown hair had been cut to approved length, no lower than the bottom of his ears. Daniel smoothed the hair back with his fingers so it wouldn't stick out so much. He straightened the lines of his black uniform with the red piping and made sure his lapel pin, his security badge, was centered properly. Satisfied with his appearance, Daniel used his wand to transfigure the mirror back to a blank wall. He spun the chair around to face the front and then pushed it back against the wall. After he stood up, Daniel double-checked his boots, making sure they showed no scuff marks and there were no fingerprints to mar the shiny polish. Then he straightened his clothes again. The little details really mattered to Wizard Flint. He felt such things were a mark of one's ability. Daniel left his office, leaving his door open behind him. Then he walked off in search of Wizard Flint. Captain Wizard Macklin Flint was 10 years younger than Daniel and had joined the detective department a year earlier, but he was a wizard, first class, and so Daniel's superior. Macklin Flint was second cousin to Antonin Dolhov, head of Department of Magical Law Enforcement, and grandnephew of Augustus Rockwood, senior undersecretary to the Minister of Magic. Flint no doubt planned to transfer to a more glamorous position as soon as there were openings in the Ministry of Magic. Daniel found Wizard Flint in his office. He was seated at his desk, relaxing with his partner, Wizard Higgs, who was seated on the other side. Both were in good spirits, laughing heartily. Daniel stood respectfully outside the office door with his eyes downcast and waited to be noticed. It was not proper to interrupt his superiors. Wizard Flint saw Daniel standing in the doorway. His eyes lit up. "Ah," he said, breaking off his conversation with Wizard Higgs and addressing Daniel, "just the person I was looking for." Not that he had looked very hard. Daniel gave a brief, respectful bow, but remained standing where he was and waited for Wizard Flint to continue. He was not permitted to enter a superior's office unless invited. Wizard Flint stood up and picked a slender folder off his desk. "I've a runner for you to identify," he said, walking over and handing the folder to Daniel. "As you wish," said Daniel respectfully, taking the folder and tucking it under his arm. "I just brought her in," the wizard added. "It was a real sweet pickup," he continued proudly. "We just scooped her up at the station and brought her in. No muss, no fuss." Translation: the runner hadn't made a break for it when they approached and had been apprehended and removed without distressing any of the Muggle witnesses. That was good. That meant there would be no annoying Muggle outcry or publicity showing security in a poor light that would later have to be tracked down and modified or destroyed. "You could take lessons from me," Wizard Flint added grandly. "If you had more pickups and captures to your name instead of just identifications, you could be promoted to first class." "No doubt you are right," said Daniel politely. He knew better than to disagree with a superior. That was considered improper. But Daniel also knew he had no chance of receiving further promotion. Daniel was a non. The Sorting Hat placed all wizards into one of two categories, Slytherin or non. Slytherins ruled both the wizard and the Muggle world. They considered themselves superior to all others, thus deserving preferential treatment. Only wizards ranked first class could hold the most important government positions and the best-paying jobs. Only Slytherins got promoted to first class. "Where is the runner now?" asked Daniel, changing the subject. "Detention room 3, replied Wizard Flint. "No name, no wand, but she's one of yours for sure," he added casually. Translation: not a Slytherin. But that was no surprise. Most runners were nons. "I softened her up a bit, so it shouldn't take too long." That was not good. Wizard Flint's idea of softening often meant Daniel had to take a runner to St. Mungle's for treatment before he could even begin the identification process. "It shouldn't be too difficult for you to get her identified and sent off before the end of the day," Wizard Flint continued airily. "I shall do my best," said Daniel calmly. Privately, however, he wondered, if it's so easy, why aren't you doing it? He handed Wizard Flint the standard form for his signature. It would order Daniel to take the case. "Her bag is still at the station departure point," commented Wizard Flint calmly as he signed his name. "The departure point is going to require a potions cleanup, along with my boots." He handed back the form and pointed casually to a pair of boots leaning next to his desk. They looked perfectly fine, except the soles seemed damp. It's a good thing I store a spare pair in my office, wouldn't you agree? Yes, sir, agreed Daniel, while initialing his acceptance of the order. That explained a lot. Wizard Flint was very particular about his clothing. It took priority over any interrogation. He tended to hand the messy jobs to someone else. Will there be anything else? Daniel asked, while folding up the order and placing it in his special order case, what appeared to be a slender, flat leather billfold that could and did hold large quantities of paper within. As long as you're here, said Wizard Flint casually, you can clean up my boots first. Wizard Flint handed Daniel a previously filled out and signed piece of paper. Cleaning personal apparel was a menial task, one a third year at Hogwarts could easily handle. Unfortunately, most Slytherins, especially the younger ones, never bothered to learn their cleaning spells, preferring instead to order nuns to do it for them. It gave them a feeling of power and confirmed their sense of superiority to see the nuns stoop and bend at their command. Nuns who refused to complete such demeaning tasks became target for more harassment and suffered all sorts of creative punishments at the hands of Slytherins. Daniel looked at the order carefully. Nowhere was it written that a nun had to follow the orders of a Slytherin, but to refuse would only annoy Wizard Flint, his superior. A superior could express his annoyance in almost any way he desired, including dismissal. It was not worth the risk to refuse an order. Yes, sir, said Daniel calmly, without any expression on his face. He initialed his acceptance to complete the order and placed the form in his pocket. Wizard Flint nodded casually and returned his attention to Wizard Higgs. Daniel had behaved as he had been taught, as was expected. He was no challenge or threat to Wizard Flint. While nuns were not legally obligated to follow the orders of a Slytherin, nuns could be punished for failing to follow a Slytherin order, even if it was a bad or harmful order. That fact had been drilled into Daniel's head while at Hogwarts. However, no nun could be punished for following a Slytherin order, no matter what its consequence. Daniel still remembered when the Dark Lord had decreed the resorting of Hogwarts into 2 houses. He had been 12 at the time. The nuns had suffered terribly those first years as the Slytherin students explored and exploited their new status. Later, Headmaster Snape announced that some nuns were trying to steal the credit for Slytherin inspirations, and accordingly introduced the order form. Printed on paper that contained numerous anti-cheating charms, it could not be forged or modified once signed. Order forms proved conclusively whether a nun acted on his or her initiative or at the superior instruction of a Slytherin. It also prevented Slytherins caught breaking the rules from unfairly placing the blame on a hapless nun. After the order forms proved of considerable use in tracking down and identifying an ambitious Slytherin who conspired to replace Antonin Dolhov as head of the Department of Magical Law Enforcement, the use of the order form became standard practice in the Ministry of Magic as well. It later became law that nuns need not obey a personal Slytherin directive unaccompanied by a properly signed order form. That thwarted future scheming Slytherins from trying to avoid the paper trail order forms provided. An addendum made it illegal to tamper with the order forms of a nun. Further, nuns had to produce their order forms for inspection at any time upon the directive of a Death Eater, and, of course, the Dark Lord himself. A review of all orders given to nuns was regularly conducted whenever a Slytherin applied for a transfer or promotion. As a result, ambitious Slytherins rarely involved nuns in their plans. No nun these days would comply with a Slytherin directive without an accompanying order form. The use of order forms created tons of paperwork requiring creative magical filing and storing methods, but it protected the nuns from serious Slytherin abuse. While the word of a nun was rarely taken over that of a Slytherin, the signature on an order form could be used as a defense when nuns were accused of a crime. Daniel pulled out his wand and rapidly muttered some words to perform a simple cleaning spell. He could have used a silent spell, but silent spells were considered above a nun's intellectual capacity to perform. Daniel had no desire to give the Slytherins cause to think otherwise. A nun could be dismissed for using magic that might make a superior look bad. Cleaning gave Daniel an excellent opportunity to learn more of Slytherin activities. Today, Wizard Flint and Wizard Higgs were discussing something about a magic glitch occurring in Little Winning the previous day. Daniel never acted on or used the information he overheard. The Slytherins were rather paranoid as a group and often set traps to identify non-loyal wizards. This precaution enabled Daniel to avoid many a trap during his years as a detective and helped him keep his job. By now, he knew which Slytherins were most likely to set traps. Wizard Flint was one of them, but his traps were usually rather obvious and clumsy. When he finished with the boots, Daniel handed Wizard Flint the order form for signature. Wizard Flint signed it, signifying his approval and completion of the cleaning job. Then Daniel again asked if Wizard Flint needed anything. This time, the wizard signified with a casual wave of his hand that Daniel was dismissed. Daniel gave a brief bow and left to work on the runner case. Once he had left Wizard Flint's office, Daniel turned and headed for the security exit. The runner was already in custody, so there was no rush about her. He had the runner's bag to pick up and a potions mess of some sort to clean up. Daniel checked the log and learned Wizard Flint had used the Little Winning bus station access. Then he checked the map for the nearest alternative apparition location, a toilet on the other side. It was never safe to apparate into a room with an unidentified potion mess caused by an unidentified runner. Some runners develop potions specifically to embarrass, annoy, or harass security. Daniel had seen some potions turn the skin of an unwary security wizard blue or cause his clothes to melt. Even if the potion was fairly harmless, it could have become stronger after prolonged interaction with air. Better to be safe. Tucking the runner's folder under his arms, Daniel stepped into the exit room and apparated. The bathroom was dark and stank. Daniel doubted it had been cleaned in years. "Lumos," he whispered, pulling out his wand. Immediately the tip began to glow, showing him the way to the door. When he touched the door handle, Daniel turned off the light and stowed his wand in his sleeve. Then he opened the door and carefully stepped outside. Hot exhaust fumes blasted Daniel's face as the bus roared past. Muggle transports were cumbersome, messy, dirty, and stinky. Better a proper broom, thought Daniel. But as Slytherins considered Muggles even lower than Nons, they rated nothing better than smelly vehicles, and were lucky to have even that. Daniel made his way swiftly across the terminal to the security entrance. The Muggles immediately backed away in fear from him, clearing a walking path. A little girl darted front to collect her doll, dropped in their haste. The mother anxiously grabbed her child's arm, yanking her from the doll and out of his way. The child cried out in surprise and pain. Daniel didn't like being regarded as an ogre, but it was better the Muggles feared. It would keep them alive longer. Maybe. Sometimes the Death Eaters got bored and roamed the skies looking for diversions. That's when planes went mysteriously off course before crashing, houses blew up or caught fire, and buildings fell without explanation. Unknown terrorists always got the blame, and security got a boost in popular support. But Muggle terrorists had long since been eliminated. Only the Death Eaters and the Slytherins remained. The security door swung open as Daniel drew near. It was designed to do that whenever someone wearing a security badge drew near. A hot blast of steam shot out. The steam added to the power and mystery image of the security. The steam also kept the Muggles from seeing that there was no actual office within, just a small, bare room with 4 sides. Accompanied with the anxiety and fear spells just outside the doors, no Muggle would dare attempt to enter. The steam would continue until the door closed. Daniel eyed the steam suspiciously. Today it seemed more than just steam. It smelled. What was that? Cooked cabbage? A very strange potion indeed. Daniel stepped cautiously within the room. The door closed silently behind him. The steam vanished, and Daniel could clearly see the runner's bag lying to one side. It looked like a plain, lime-green Muggle bag decorated with white daisies. The bottom of the bag lay in a puddle of liquid that spread out across the floor. The damp daisies on the bottom were stained a light pinkish color. The whole room smelled of cabbage. Daniel stepped closer and knelt down, lifting the bag by a dry section. The sound of broken glass clinked within. Using his wand, Daniel carefully flipped up the flap of the bag and peered inside. It was a major mess. Translucent pieces of greenish cabbage lined the walls of the bag. An apple was mushed into a soggy lump of brown bread. Some round pinkish white globs stuck to the sides and was smeared all over a wet pinkish package and a small sodden paper bag. Intermixed between it all were 2 jar lids and shards of broken glass. Daniel cautiously put his finger to the liquid on the floor, touching it. He rubbed the drops between his thumb and forefinger and sniffed it. Tomato? Daniel stood in relief. He very much doubted this was a potion at all. Using his wand, he pointed it to the glass and said reparo. Instantly, the shards reformed into 2 plain glass jars. One of them contained bits of cabbage and traces of a reddish liquid. Jars were a muggle thing and did not make proper potion containers. Wizard Flint had been wrong about the potions cleanup, mused Daniel as he quickly cast a spell to mop up the floor, and then another to dry the bag. I wonder what other mistakes he has made. Daniel drew out a security case from his pocket and opened it. Though fairly certain the bag was harmless, it never hurt to be safe. Fugitive wizards often rigged their things with booby traps, or delayed spells timed to go off at the station. Daniel placed the runner's bag carefully within. Then he gripped the bag firmly under his arm next to the runner's folder and apparated back to the station. Once in the station, Daniel took the bag and folder back to his office. He liked to learn as much as possible about a runner before beginning an interview. Daniel set the security case to one side and opened the folder. He pulled out the top page, the runner form. The date and time of identification was neatly pinned in. There were many spaces left blank. Name, age, physical description. That meant the monitor had not recognized the runner. That was not uncommon, as most runners took a polyjuice potion while running. The bottom had been filled out by Wizard Flint. The runner was charged with traveling without a permit, resisting arrest, traveling without a wand. A separate notation indicated that both the girl and her bag had been scanned to confirm this. Possession of dangerous potions, disrespecting a superior. Daniel set the runner form down to be filled out later. He pulled out the next page in the file. It was a photo. This was the one that had identified the runner. It showed a rather grainy image of a girl with brown braids reaching out, taking some money and tickets, and putting them in her bag. Daniel examined it carefully. Definitely a witch, he concluded. Security officials had placed numerous wizard eyes throughout each city at strategic locations for the express purpose of locating wizard fugitives, mostly mudbloods and runners. It was very effective. Once a monitor had identified a potential criminal, the photo and accompanying information was forwarded to headquarters, where it was reviewed and then sent to the appropriate wizard for action. Wizards' first order were always assigned a pickup. Wizards' second order were usually given the cleanup, if any, and the more tedious follow-up work. Daniel found a second picture behind the first. That was odd. Usually the monitors took one photo for security identification purposes, and a wizard trial if necessary, and moved his or her attention on to other surveillances. This was a much better photo, crisp and clean. It was a Muggle-style still, showing a young girl standing in the terminal. With a start, Daniel realized that there were no wizard eyes positioned to provide that specific photo angle. Obviously, the Slytherin, only Slytherins could be monitors, had somehow tapped into a Muggle security camera and gotten this image. Very creative, he thought. Daniel looked more closely at the runner. The girl was slim and wearing an oversized dirty gray sweatshirt. She looked to be nearly the age of his own daughter. Assuming her actual age was similar to that in the photo, Daniel couldn't imagine an adult using polyjuice to take on a child's form. The girl looked to be a little young to be running. She was obviously running, true, but probably not for the usual reasons. Perhaps it was because of a family argument or something. Usually the running started the last few years at Hogwarts or right afterwards, when the reality of their situation sank in. Students, especially nons, often ran in protest, seeking the freedom denied in everyday life. Left alone, they eventually came back. The Dark Lord controlled Great Britain and Europe, with his first lieutenant, Vinar Greyback, running the European operation. Tom Riddle, the Dark Lord protege, controlled the Americas, and Daniel had heard some crazed wizard named Grindelwald controlled Africa. Bluntly, running wasn't enough, because the runners had no place to run to. Unfortunately, only Wizards First Class could travel freely without express authorization. Even security members had to apply for and receive travel authorization. Daniel's own authorization was kept safely in his documents folder. It was very general to accommodate the kind of work he did. The authorization came with the job and was automatically revoked should he lose his position. Runners were clearly breaking the travel laws, so they were hunted down and brought in like any other common criminal. Runners weren't criminals, not really. So Daniel tried his hardest to get captured runners out of detention and back home with their families as soon as possible. Daniel placed the photos on top of the runner form and looked at the remaining paper beneath. The monitor had made some observation notes. That was most unusual. This was a very thorough monitor indeed. The notes indicated that the runner had purchased 2 tickets for Thorpe. 2? It would appear that there might be another runner. One Wizard Flint had missed. Thorpe was also a rather unusual destination. What did the runner plan to find in Thorpe? Then the runner ate an apple, took a drink from a jar, used the loo, and made a phone call. A telephone call? Only Muggles used telephones. Wizard children had no need for Muggle technology. When had the girl learned how to use a telephone? Muggle technology was frowned upon, and its use certainly wasn't taught at Hogwarts. Daniel had had to attend special workshops after he became a detective to learn the basics of Muggle technology. Who had taught this girl? Why? A second notation indicated the girl had asked for the number of a Charles Smith, located in Brundon, outside Sudbury, Suffolk. How did the monitor learn that? And so quickly? Obviously, the monitor knew a thing or two about Muggle technology as well. Very unique, especially for a Slytherin. The signature at the bottom of the page read P. Crowley. This P. Crowley would bear remembering. Daniel returned his thoughts to the runner. Who were the Smiths, and how did they relate to the runner? Smith? That name sounded familiar. It was a common enough name, but when connected to Suffolk. Daniel closed his eyes and scanned his memory. It was an excellent memory, able to recall names, dates, and places with perfect clarity. It was one reason why he had become such a good detective. Daniel frowned, recalling. He had received an order to remove the name Smith from the Suffolk Muggle directory only last year. And yes, the name Charles had been one of those names. That could mean only one thing. The Smiths were a mudblood family. Wizard purification was something highly encouraged by Minister Lestrange and backed by the Ministry of Magic. It was a large part of wizard security responsibilities and, to Daniel, the most distasteful. Fortunately for him, purification positions paid well and were only given to wizards first class. Death Eater Barty Crouch enthusiastically headed the Department of Wizard Purification. The program assumed all mudbloods gained their magical powers by theft. Accordingly, an identified mudblood was swiftly apprehended by security members and immediately sent to Azkaban prison without even the benefit of a trial. Of course, a mudblood child could not have the knowledge or ability to steal magic alone, so the parents were presumed to be accomplices. They were sent to Azkaban prison too. As for the rest of the family, they were picked up as well. No family meant no one to complain to authorities about missing relatives. The other members of a mudblood family, those not guilty of any wizard crime, could not simply be released. They knew too much. The younger ones had their memories modified and became orphans. They were adopted out and raised by select Muggle families. As to the other family members, they just vanished. Daniel wasn't sure of their fate. He had heard rumors that their memories were modified and that they were sent to Europe as cheap labor. He had also heard that would-be Death Eaters liked live subjects upon which to practice their more lethal spells. Either way, they were never seen again. Many of Daniel's responsibilities came after the apprehension of a mudblood family. Sometimes he was instructed to send official security notices to Muggle News reporting the successful capture of mudblood individuals and/or families, identifying them as key terrorist groups or criminals. Daniel assigned crimes, posted appropriate photos and rewards for the capture of known mudbloods who somehow escaped a purification sweep. He also investigated Muggle leads and handed out rewards to Muggles whose tips led to the successful apprehension of a fugitive mudblood. If, after a year or two, there was no Muggle outcry over the disappearance of a mudblood family, Daniel was instructed to remove the name of that particular family from the Muggle documents, so other Muggles could not verify their existence, let alone trace their disappearances. As a result, countless numbers of mudblood families had simply vanished without comment by the general Muggle population. The Muggles weren't really blind to the disappearances, but those who spoke out in public about their concerns often vanished soon after, or became the next murder victim of some criminal or terrorist. Rarely did the security members intent on purification resort to memory modification. Security members never discussed or published the number of mudbloods and their families apprehended through their purification efforts, but Daniel knew. He had an excellent memory, and the numbers were depressing. Daniel could do nothing for the mudblood families picked up by security. Thinking about it, Daniel decided it might have been to the girl's advantage that Wizard Flint got to her when he did. The girl's inquiry had probably set off numerous red flags. No doubt a security purification team had already been dispatched to locate the source of the inquiry. If they had found her, matters might have been far worse. The fate of mudbloods in the wizard community was a taboo topic. Wizards overheard speaking of it in any way, or caught helping mudbloods, were dealt with severely. They could expect to be sent to Azkaban prison. As the girl was a witch, her Smith inquiry could be a very serious matter indeed, and could result in landing not only herself, but also her whole family in prison. So far, no purification wizards had expressed an interest in her, so it was a good bet they hadn't read the monitor notes or seen the Smith name. As there was no place in his paperwork to include an unrelated telephone inquiry, Daniel had no intention of mentioning it to them. So, unless the very efficient P. Crowley had access to mudblood removal lists, which Daniel very much doubted, this infraction might slip by unnoticed. Daniel set the page of the monitor notes on top of the photos and closed the folder. Then he lifted the security case containing the runner's bag and placed it in front of him for examination. He already knew it carried food, but what else did it contain? Before beginning, Daniel closed his office door and activated the security force field. If the runner's bag was booby-trapped, the resulting spell could only affect his office. Using his wand, Daniel opened the security case. It unfolded like a flower while turning into a protective black square of silky cloth covering his desk. That kept the case contents from touching any substance on the desk that might serve as a reactant. The bag lay squarely on the center of his desk, ready for examination. Daniel then lifted the bag, opened the flap, and gently tipped the contents onto his desk, taking care to not let the apple roll or the jars break again. Anything carrying a spell would immediately fizzle and pop upon touching the security case cloth. Nothing made the slightest suspicious sound. Using his wand as a stick, Daniel carefully spread out the contents. He recognized most of it from before. Daniel lifted up the pinkish package. Unwrapping it, Daniel found a chunk of rather smelly cheese within. The paper bag contained raisins. Daniel now proceeded to examine the bag itself, looking for any hidden compartments. He found a zippered compartment on one side of the bag. He opened it, withdrew the contents, and placed them on the cloth. It was mostly Muggle money, a bill and a couple of coins. Interesting. No wizard money. Perhaps the runner had been carrying that on her person. Wand scans wouldn't reveal money or other things of interest, only wands. Daniel also found 2 rectangular pieces of paper with Muggle printing on them. The paper was pinkish in color, no doubt stained from the tomato, and the ink on the papers had run together, making them difficult to read. Daniel peered at the papers closely. One was a canceled bus ticket to Thorpe, and the other— Daniel straightened in his seat in surprise. The other was the second ticket to Thorpe, uncanceled. There had been no second runner, just a clever first runner. Had the runner been clever in other ways too? Was Thorpe even her real destination? Daniel carefully examined the rest of the runner's bag. Satisfied it contained nothing else of interest, he set the 2 tickets aside and put the rest of the contents back into the bag. Then Daniel refolded the security case around the bag and put the bag on the floor next to his desk. Next, he reopened his office door, releasing the security force field. It was no longer necessary. Daniel returned his attention to the runner case folder. He pulled out the second photo, the still, and placed it to one side along with the monitor notes and tickets. He might have further use for them. Knowing what he now knew about the runner, Daniel reconsidered the charges with an eye for how they might be modified or changed in the best interest of the runner. That was what Daniel did best. 98% of the running cases that passed his desk were resolved within 24 hours of identification without ever going to trial. That saved the ministry lots of time, effort, and paperwork. Parents were happy to get their children back with a minimum of fuss, and Daniel found ways to make that happen. Traveling without a permit. Daniel could do nothing about that. She had no permit. Resisting arrest. Daniel found it hard to imagine that slim little girl doing much of anything in the way of resistance. Hadn't Wizard Flint even said it was an easy pickup? This charge would make Wizard Flint the laughingstock of the wizard community should it ever be brought to court. Under the proper circumstances, Daniel was sure he could persuade Wizard Flint to drop it. Traveling without a wand. Wands could be used to identify a runner and were frequently hidden. Unfortunately, it was a serious offense to be caught without one. Perhaps the wand had been left at home to ensure it wouldn't get lost or stolen. That would depend on the whereabouts of the wand. Possession of dangerous potions. That charge could be easily dropped. As near as Daniel could tell, there had been no potion. Disrespecting a superior. What on earth had she done to receive this charge? No matter. Given the girl's obvious youth, perhaps a sincere apology could set this straight. Wizard Flint tended to respond well to flattery. Daniel set the runner form back in the folder. He would know better how to deal with the charges after he talked with the runner. He checked the clock. The runner had been in detention for over an hour now. Good. The effects of any polyjuice potion she might have taken would have worn off. Daniel found that runners, especially the females, hated it when anyone watched them morph back into their original forms. Daniel pushed back his chair and stood up. He grabbed his wizard robes and put them on over his uniform. Runners tended to be more comfortable talking to someone in robes rather than a security uniform. Also, his robe often came in handy as a spare covering. Sometimes a runner's clothes didn't fit properly after the polyjuice potion wore off. Then a runner might be too embarrassed to cooperate. Daniel stepped out of his office and headed towards detention. He had a runner to meet. "Any problems?" asked Daniel as he handed Wizard Braesbury his authorization to take charge of the detainee in room 3. "Not a peep," replied Wizard Braesbury. He was the security guard in charge of watching the detention rooms. The detainees were kept under constant surveillance as a matter of policy. Not that they were told, of course. "She's barely moved from where Wizard Flint left her," he added. Daniel looked through the tiny viewing screen at a figure huddled on the floor. "She isn't hurt, is she?" he asked with concern, remembering how Wizard Flint had boasted of softening her up. "I don't think so," said Wizard Braesbury thoughtfully, "but I can't be sure." Daniel nodded. He would see for himself soon enough. "I'll be going in now," he announced, checking to ensure his security badge was on securely. The detention rooms had no doors or windows. The only access was through apparating, and then only if one wore a security badge or was touching someone wearing a security badge. Daniel walked to the departure point. Without another word, he apparated into detention room number 3.